the opportunity of financial resources expended on national security with clear 75% of our national security progress. And I will tell you how.
The organization has. So we're talking about how the board behaves, or in some cases, how they misbehave, because that also happens, rather than the tax they do.
Very rare Yoruba names that I know.
I tell you, I've secured the name and I greet our esteemed audience and bid you welcome to ICAN on Air. We touch a searchlight in knowledge to our public on this topic today: transfer pricing, dissecting the key issues. The Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria is doing that today because back in 2021, as our audience might recall, the Nigerian transfer pricing space, transfer pricing TP for short, was impacted by a number of domestic and international developments which are expected to shape and influence the TP landscape in this current period. Then our audience might recall we had the landmark agreements on the OECD two-pillar solution, or OTPS for short. That agreement aimed at introducing a fair system of taxing the profits of multinational enterprises, what we refer to as MNES. At the same time, addressing the challenges associated with digital economy, which has now been associated with the digital space, with advanced significance on the commencement of year 2023 for some of these initiatives I've just mentioned. Just spoken as an amateur there. Because joining us on our question and answer session of the program to dissect the key issues to the subject is JOSH BAMFO, MA, PhD. Dr. Bamfo is a partner head of transfer pricing services practice at Anderson in Nigeria, as well as the global co-leader for TP with responsibilities for Africa and Middle East. He has 15 years of experience specializing in TP while working for the Big Four. I'm talking about the Big Four firms in the US, in South Africa, in Nigeria, and in Ghana. He has been a visiting assistant professor of economics at the University of Delaware, USA. Hang on a minute. We'll unveil more on this our special guest to you shortly. And also on this program, as usual, you will see a few adverts and ICAN diary of events that shapes, guides, and let our publics know how we break in the ceiling and how the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria is becoming first among equals in the field of professionalism in Nigeria. So stay connected. We will be back with you very shortly. Thank you and welcome back. Join me in welcoming Dr. Josh Bamfo to ICAN on Air. Dr. Bamfo, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Akin Fatunke, for having me.
Super. Something interested me when we put out the flyers for this subject. I didn't realize, though not surprised, that students of accounting both home and abroad in the West African sub-region are interested in this subject. Perhaps somebody is telling them that will be the next level for their professional exams. Not only that, I see that practitioners of accounting and business have been playing around that subject. And so it takes me to frame our discussions for today in the way it will go in terms of definition of terms, so we know where we are going right from the onset. Transfer pricing. There are key issues, of course. How do we dissect them? How will you define transfer pricing? And how does it relate to taxation?
Thank you very much, Mr. Akin. So before we can understand the concept of transfer pricing, we need to go back to its genesis. In fact, the background or the roots of transfer pricing emanates from an area in economics called industrial organization. So when you look at industrial organization, we study about how industries, businesses are organized. And we recognize that when businesses transact, they transact in two major ways. One with independent parties, which we call the market, and the other is when they transact amongst themselves, which is departments or different units or different subsidiaries. So when they deal with the market, right, the price that those transactions take place is market price. And we've learned a lot about market prices, so that is nothing new for us, right? So what is the market price for a product? You can easily quote it because that is the prevailing price. And market prices are influenced by the forces of demand and supply. So basically the company cannot pretty much determine the price unless it's a monopoly, because demand and supply forces will determine the price. So whatever the outcome, the profitability that the company declares, for tax purposes is deemed to be fair. So tax authorities do not have a problem when companies are dealing with independent parties because they know that the profit they will declare is a fair outcome. So they are paying a fair amount of taxes. Where the challenge comes in is when companies are dealing with their related parties. So you could be part of a group of companies and you are dealing with a subsidiary. So I might be the manufacturing company and I'm dealing with, a subsidiary, which is a distributing company in another jurisdiction. But because they are related, other factors can come into play such that the outcome in terms of the pricing and the profit declared might not be fair. And if the profit declared is not fair, then a tax administration in a particular jurisdiction is being shortchanged. And that's how transfer price, which is the price that is charged when related parties transact amongst with each other, then becomes transfer pricing, which is a discipline in taxation, which focuses on how tax administrators regulate the transactions amongst related parties such a way that the pricing is fair and the profit declared is fair and the taxes paid on them are also fair. So that is the simple linkage between transfer price and transfer pricing, which is a discipline in taxation. So clearly, if you don't have a regulation to regulate how related parties, when they transact amongst each other, how they determine the price in a fair manner, so that they declare the fair amount of profit, so that they pay a fair amount of taxes to the jurisdiction that they transact in. And then that particular country can be shortchanged. That's the reason why Nigeria had to pass this regulation in 2012 to protect its tax base.
Excellent. Thank you. And if so, that guides us as practitioners in our true and fair statements and ensuring that we have done all what we need to do at arm transactions. I understand it. I'm very sure my professional friends and business partners also understand it, and you understand it.
Good.
Let's come to the Nigerian government. Do they understand the importance of transfer pricing? I'm talking about the Nigerian government and the taxpayers. How important is it to them?
Thank you very much, Mr. Ken. This is a very important question because it begs the question, why would they pass the regulation if it wasn't that important to government? So clearly on the government side, transfer pricing is extremely important. What government realized, in fact, this came out from United Nations and IMF, they all talked about the fact that African countries needed to protect their tax base and they needed to look inward to generate the revenues they needed for developmental purposes in order to spur growth. And transfer pricing is one of the ways that they can actually protect their tax base. And what they then did was to come up with a regulation which will then guide the way multinational enterprises or group companies transact among themselves. So by ensuring that they transact with their related parties as if they are dealing with an independent party, they are making sure that whatever the outcome of the pricing and the profitability declared is going to be fair. And that concept is called the arm's length principle. And the Nigerian government, through the regulation, has implemented that. And because they've executed this pretty well, they've been able to protect their tax base and ensure that they maximize the amount of tax revenue they can generate from group companies and multinational enterprises without allowing them to shift profits from a country with a high corporate tax rate, such as Nigeria, to other jurisdictions where corporate tax rates might be lower. So this is extremely important to government. The other element about transfer pricing that is important is you don't want a situation whereby the tax administrators are too aggressive in the implementation of the transfer pricing and the application are inconsistent. Because when you do that, it can be a deterrent to foreign direct investment. So as much as you want to protect your tax base, you want to implement it in such a way that your application of the methods and the concepts are consistent, they are clear, such that taxpayers can voluntarily comply, and they believe that when they do comply, they're going to get a fair kind of hearing when they go through an audit process. In that case, you're able to plug the loopholes, maximize your tax revenue, and at the same time, you don't become a deterrent to foreign direct investment because that can have an adverse impact in terms of job creation. So that is the government side. On the taxpayer side, what is important is that When we started the transfer pricing regime as far back as 2013, financial year 2013, a lot of taxpayers didn't take it seriously. I mean, a few multinational enterprises that had presence in other jurisdictions that already had transfer pricing took it more seriously. But what they failed to realize is that transfer pricing consistently has been deemed to be one of the riskiest areas of taxation in most of the advanced economies. And now taxpayers are gradually realizing that it is that crucial. So what is important to them is for them to make sure that they comply with the requirements of the regulation, because non-compliance leads to administrative penalties, which at a minimum is around 10 million naira. And it can be way more than that depending on your volume of related party transactions. Secondly, it's important that they're able to document their arguments to demonstrate to taxpayers, to the tax administration, that look, all our transactions we had with our related parties were done in a fair, reasonable manner, as if we're dealing with independent parties. And this is the documentation that clearly stipulates how we went about doing it, and you demonstrate how fair it is, so that when you get audited by the FIRS, which is the Tax Administration of Nigeria, you are not going to be assessed additional tax liabilities that can actually hurt your business. So clearly, transfer pricing is extremely important to government in terms of protecting the tax base and making sure that it doesn't become a deterrent to foreign direct investment. And it's also important to taxpayers in terms of ensuring that they are fully compliant so that they can save money from not paying unnecessary administrative penalties, and can also make sure that when they are audited, they don't get assessed additional tax liabilities.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. Acknowledging Bidemi Olurumbi Akinpelu, welcome to ICAN on Air. Extremely pleased that from Poland, I have our friend Philip Winsky joining us today to look at this important subject of transfer pricing and how the key issues are being dissected by our one and only Dr. Josh Bamfo. And for the rest, if you are just joining, this is ICAN on Air, the gift of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria to our Nigeria. Makes us and carves us a niche that makes us different and call us men from the boys. If you have questions, please don't hesitate. Put them on. Dr. Josh Bamfo will deal with them. Back to you, Dr. Bamfo. Just for us to know, when were the Nigerian TP regulations first gazetted? And how has the regime developed over the years?
Thank you very much, Mr. Akin. This is a very good question, because it's important that we understand the genesis of this regime. So in 2012, Nigeria gazetted its first transfer pricing regulations. So it affected most taxpayers from financial year 2013 up onwards. And when they gazetted it, there were two areas of compliance that taxpayers had to meet. The first was the fact that taxpayers needed to disclose some information about their business. And the information were in two groups. First was to disclose the group structure, your related parties, because transfer pricing is predicated on two conditions. First, you need to have a related party, all right? And then second, you need to have a transaction with that related party or those related parties. So if I don't have a related party, that means all my transactions are with independent parties and they are based on market prices and are deemed fair. So I don't have a transfer pricing issue. But once I have a related party, the next question is, do I have a transaction with a related party? If that's the case, then you needed to disclose all this information to the tax administration, which is the FIRS. Once the FIRS gets access to such information, which is the filing of your transfer pricing returns in the form of disclosure forms and declaration forms, they then do a risk assessment. And once they do the risk assessment and they determine that this particular taxpayer it has a high likelihood of not conducting these transactions in a fair manner, and therefore they are shortchanging the government in terms of paying less taxes, then they will go ahead and audit you. In that audit process, one of the first documents they will ask for is what we call a transfer pricing documentation. So taxpayers also have an obligation to prepare this transfer pricing documentation, year on year. We call it contemporaneously. And in there, you have to clearly demonstrate that all your transactions with your related parties were done in a fair manner. There are ways to do that. There are methods. It's pretty complex. I'm going to details here. But once you do that, all right, and you send it to the tax authorities and they are fine with it, then you're not going to be assessed additional tax liabilities. Where they dispute it, there's going to be back and forth, and then we try to see where we can settle. So that was in 2012. In 2018, they revised the regulation. And one of the major changes that they made in the revised version in 2018 was to introduce administrative penalties. And the reason why they did that was because taxpayers weren't voluntarily complying. In other words, some didn't have an incentive to disclose this information for fear that you come and audit them. So if I don't disclose, how do you get information to come and audit me? So the tax administrators felt that they needed to have some stick, to ensure that they can enforce the regulation. So they introduced these administrative penalties in the 2018 version. And since then, taxpayers have been more compliant than before. So the first version was in 2012, and the revised version was in 2018. And so now this regime is based on the 2018 version of the transfer pricing regulations.
Super. 2012, work in progress till 2018. And as we always say, there will always be room for improvement. I am looking at two of the stakeholders here: the Federal Inland Revenue Service on one hand, and of course the Nigerian taxpayers on the other. You will almost invariably find that the VUCA, VUCA, the vulnerability, the uncertainty, the complexity, the ambiguity comes into it, and so comes under challenges. I'd like you to spell it out for us based on your practical knowledge of this. Are there major challenges that the Federal Inland Revenue Service has faced in the development of the TP regime in Nigeria?
Yes, clearly, given the fact that they had to revise the regulation shows that they had challenges. So the challenges are going to be in twofold. So the challenges they had before 2018. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the major challenges was non-compliance level was very low. It was very high. They weren't complying because there wasn't much incentive to comply. You understand me? So FIRS will send a query, why are you to file your TP returns? And the taxpayer will not have an incentive because, the penalties in the previous regulation made reference to the tax law in terms of not filing your tax returns. And the penalties were pretty insignificant in today's value of Naira. So clearly with the low compliance level, they were kind of handicapped in terms of actually executing the regulation. So the next level was to introduce these administrative penalties, which actually helped. All right. And so when they introduced it, I remember December 2018, they gave some grace period that if you've not even filed your TP returns in the past, come in, file, we're not going to penalize you, even though we've introduced these penalties. And you could see long queues at the FIRS office in Ikoyi, because most taxpayers then had an incentive to actually file because they wanted to avoid the administrative penalties. So since 2018, there's been, much better, compliance level. But still, they still have some challenges in terms of the timing of when taxpayers, respond to queries. That is still an ongoing challenge, but I think it's getting better. The other challenge they had, previously was how quickly they completed their transfer pricing audits. There were transfer pricing audits that lasted for 3-4 years without coming to any conclusion. So if they were going to meet their revenue targets, then they needed to complete these transfer pricing audits pretty quickly. Now that they have administrative penalties, what we've seen in recent times, they're able to conclude these transfer pricing audits timely and then can move on to others. So now the timing is better and that they can cover a lot more of taxpayers in terms of audits. So they've basically been able to circumvent some of these challenges. It doesn't mean that they've been entirely eradicated, but they've been highly mitigated.
Super. And then, so let's see what Hakeem right now is putting across here. He's interested to know how effective the transfer pricing administration system in Nigeria is, and does the Federal Inland Revenue Service, do they have what it takes to handle it?
Yeah, so Hakeem, good question. So clearly, as I said, the first regime prior to the revised transfer pricing regulation, they had significant challenges. One, the regulation didn't have teeth because they didn't have the ability to enforce it, with administrative penalties. But now they do. Secondly, the size of the international tax department, which is responsible for transfer pricing, was relatively small, which meant that they couldn't take on as many cases in terms of audits and couldn't conclude them on time. So the first 5-6 years of the transfer pricing regime was pretty challenging for the FRS. Today, the regulation has teeth because now they have administrative penalties that they can apply, and they don't hesitate to do it. In fact, taxpayers believe they are too aggressive in terms of assessing these administrative penalties. But not only that, they've also increased the size of the team, in the international tax department. They've reorganized, the department in such a way that they become more efficient and effective. That today, they can conclude audits pretty quickly and can take on more cases, than before. So yes, I would say compared to other jurisdictions across Africa, Nigerian tax authorities in terms of the transfer pricing is one of the most robust, and I would say a bit on the aggressive side. The only other tax administration that I would say has a lot of experience in the first place would be SARS, which is South Africa, tax administration, which has had transfer pricing regime as far back as 1995. So clearly, they are more experienced than us. But apart from the South Africa tax administration, in terms of transfer pricing, I think Nigeria will be the second in terms of size, robustness, and capabilities.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Dr. Bamfo, other than what all of us know about tax attitude, tax avoidance, tax evasion, and dancing around the corners, if we assume that was not there, from the perspective of the taxpayer, do you see or could share with us, based on your experience, the major TP-related challenges that taxpayers in Nigeria are facing?
So clearly, taxpayers, obviously those who want to comply, want clarity. Nobody wants ambiguities, right? So many a times, especially in the early times of the regime, they felt that there weren't clarities in terms of the regulation. The revised TP regulation tried to clarify some of these areas, all right? And then there was some sensitization, so that helped, but that has not been fully eradicated. So that is one side of things. Clarity is very important. Any taxpayer that wants to comply wants clarity. They don't want a situation whereby the regulation is saying one thing, but the tax administrators are saying something differently. So who do we go with, right? Because we are guided by the regulation. The second aspect is that transfer pricing is one area that requires a lot of international cooperation because it's an international tax. Because usually it's transactions between a subsidiary or a parent company in Nigeria dealing with a foreign affiliate, either another parent company or subsidiary. So you need cooperation, or else there's going to be double taxation risk being faced by the international enterprise. And because of that, transfer pricing is predicated on a concept that has been accepted globally, with the exception of Brazil, which is even correcting it today. And that is called the arm's length principle. So the arm's length principle is the cornerstone of transfer pricing. And all that is saying is that deal with your related parties as if you are dealing with an independent party. So the only way I can measure whether your dealings with your related party is fair is to treat you as if you are an independent party. And as long as I'm not related to you, I'll not have an incentive to cede some profits to you. So that outcome will be fair. So that is the basic principle. Now, there are some provisions in the current regulation, especially when it comes to the license of intangibles such as technology, marketing intangibles like brand and all that, that the regulation has capped the amount of royalties. Because when I license my technology to you, you pay royalties for the use of my license, right? Now, the arm's length principle has a way of measuring the value of that royalty. But the Nigerian TP regulations has capped the amount to 5% of EBITDA. Such that irrespective of whether the arm's length principle would dictate that you pay, let's say, 3% of net sale, they are going to allow 5% of EBITDA as the amount that is deductible for tax purposes, which means the excess you cannot recognize for tax deduction purposes. And that can lead to double taxation risk. And that is one of the areas that is problematic, because one of the major objectives of the Nigerian TP regulations is to actually mitigate or reduce double taxation risk for taxpayers. However, this particular provision actually makes or enhances or worsens the double taxation risk. So these are some of the few things that taxpayers actually worry about. So if you happen to be in the consumer markets industry where name of brand is very important, Maggie Q, well known globally, so if they license it to you, you have to pay a royalty, but they say, hey, it's going to be capped, that creates a lot of problems. So those are the few areas that taxpayers are really concerned about. And we are hoping that when the TP regulations is ready to be revised again, hopefully they will take some of these issues into consideration, because some of us as tax practitioners have written articles and talked about these issues, even with the FR. So I hope that they are listening to us and they'll be able to take into consideration, because you don't want a situation whereby you let your transfer pricing becomes a deterrent to foreign direct investment.
A deterrent, or what you say in business, a terrorist, so to speak. And while we are looking at that seriously, looking to how hopefully they are listening and they'll do what is needful. For today, the risks are there. What would be your advice on how taxpayers can mitigate their TP risks exposure today?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Kim. This is extremely important, because a lot of taxpayers have not come to recognize how risky transfer pricing is to businesses. When the first judgment came out, in terms of a transfer pricing case, which the FIRS won, and we saw the amount of assessed tax liabilities that came up. All right, that was enough just for 2 years. That was enough to cripple that particular company called Prime Plasticum. All right, so it tells you that if you get it wrong, it can actually shut a company down. So you really need to take it seriously. So what are the areas of risk? The first area of risk is pretty simple to avoid. All you have to do is comply with the disclosures. They are telling you to disclose information about your group companies in the form of a declaration form, and they are telling you to disclose information about your related party transactions. That is easy to comply, right? But some companies either do it late, which they face some kind of penalties for lateness, or they don't do it at all, and FIRS pick them up. Then they are assessed for lateness going back to back years. And the minimum is 10 million, and it can go as high as hundreds of millions. So you can actually avoid it, but it's a risk that they are facing, and they are still facing that. But that is one that they can avoid. All you need to do is be compliant and do it on time, and then you'll be able to avoid those administrative risks. So that is one element of it, and that is easier to mitigate. The second element is that documentation I was talking about. Preparing a report or a documentation that you can convince tax authorities that your related party transactions were done in a fair and reasonable manner, so that you paid your fair amount of taxes. That is a pretty complex exercise. And many a times, because businesses, taxpayers want to minimize their costs of preparing this, all right, their choice of advisors to do it, when maybe they don't have the skill set to actually do it. And two, they themselves, trying to do it in-house when they don't really understand how to do it. And thirdly, doing something that's not robust enough. That can come back to hurt you, because during an audit, the FRS goes through the whole process of actually preparing a transfer pricing documentation, because they are preparing their own report to, try to check whether yours is right or not. They come to the field audit, interview personnel in the company, trying to understand the facts, and then they do their own analysis, and then they try to compare what you've done to see whether you are right or wrong and what have you. So that particular documentation is where the major risk is, because when they disagree with you, they will then determine what your profitability should have been and the amount of taxes you should have paid on that profit. And if they increase the profit by a huge amount and they then apply the 30% or 32% if you add education tax to it, then that can be significant for multiple years, and usually do it over a 5 or 6 year period. And that multiplier effect can actually shut your business down, especially if the volume of transactions is huge. So that is critical. And the last bit is sometimes people don't, taxpayers don't have the documents, the supporting documents. So FIS requests for ledgers, invoices and all that, and you don't have that, So how would your arguments be compelling? So you need to have a proactive mindset and have what we call an audit file, where all invoices with your related parties, invoices with your third parties and all that are clearly documented and filed, so that when FIS requests for them, you are confidently providing them, knowing that they are supporting the arguments you've made in your report. Once taxpayers do all that, being proactive in complying, preparing robust TP documentation, and having a proactive mindset of preparing an audit file that they can easily avail to tax administrators during an audit, then they will be pretty fine. But most taxpayers are not doing that, and that is where the risk lies.
Fantastic. Awesome. Beautiful. Enlightening. If you just join in, I again say this is ICAN on Air. Looking at the subject of transfer pricing, and we are dissecting the key issues. With me on our program today is Dr. JOSH BAMFO. Your questions can still streak in. For now, we go on a short break, and when we come back, we will continue. So firing questions on both cylinders to Dr. JOSH BAMFO for our understanding. The opportunity of financial literacy extended on national grid. So there 17 sides at the end of our national security program.
The organization has. So we're talking about how the board behaves, or in some cases, how they misbehave, because that also happens, rather than the tax relief.
Very rare human names that I know.
I tell you, you have secured the name and content. Thank you for staying on, talking to online participants, and for your encouraging comments and the questions coming. Please keep them coming. Dr. JOSH BAMFO, I come back to pull you back. I know you already talked about incentives. You already talked about the fact that from 2012 to 2018, we moved on. But we all know the attitude of the taxpayer, for whatever reason, either because of lack of knowledge, which the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria is having. The templates are all there. We ask them to come to us. I'd like to ask you, how can the Federal Inland Revenue Service encourage voluntary, the delineating word is voluntary compliance with the TP regulations?
Thank you very much, Mr. King. This is an extremely important question, because we don't always want to crack the whip. You want a situation whereby you have a regime where taxpayers really understand that they have an obligation to comply. So they go out there and comply. without every time revenue authorities going after them and making it more confrontational. So clearly, there are a number of things that the FIs can do so that can encourage voluntary compliance. One of the issues is that you still have, a relatively fewer number of companies that one way or the other have not been compliant and would want to comply. But for fear that when they decide to file their returns, they will face penalties that will be backdated to when they should have complied in the first place. I know that FIS gave some grace period, back then, that during that window, a number of taxpayers took advantage of it. And since then, they've been compliant going forward. If they can consider at some point doing something similar to rope in those who are non-compliant but would want to comply, so that on a going forward basis, they will voluntarily comply, is something they should consider. Because the more you have within the tax net, in this case, the transfer pricing tax net complying, the better. But alternatively, IFRS can choose not to give that grace period and then go after such companies and then assess them, administrative penalties, which will help them achieve their revenue targets. So it's up to them, right? But if they really want to encourage voluntary compliance, I think creating that window, that grace period, where you actually encourage those who are left out because they weren't compliant, but are afraid that if they come in, they're going to be assessed, administrative penalties for late filing, going back 5-6 years, and so they would rather be in the shadows than come out, then you want to consider such a incentive so that they come in. The second element is a provision in the transfer pricing regulation that for one reason or the other, the FIS has decided to delay its implementation. And this is a concept called an advanced pricing arrangement. And what it means is that because of the recognition that transfer pricing is a highly technical area, it can be ambiguous in its application. So in jurisdictions like the US, India, and other advanced economies, they have this provision or this window where taxpayers can voluntarily go to the FRS or the tax administration and say, hey, I have a complex related party transaction, and this is the way I'm thinking about pricing it. But let's together determine whether that pricing is right, so that on a going forward basis, I apply that pricing and you don't have any reason to challenge it. So it's an advanced pricing arrangement where both parties agree on that pricing arrangement. All right. So that is extremely important. However, for one reason or the other, the FIS has delayed its implementation. One of the reasons I believe has led to the delay in the implementation of the APA, which would have led to voluntary arrangements between taxpayers and tax administrators to agree on an appropriate pricing that is deemed fair by both parties. One reason for the delay is that FRS has the transfer pricing department, which is under the International Tax Department, has a revenue target. Now, if they enter into APs, all right, and then they agree on a pricing arrangement, they cannot audit such a company and they cannot assess additional tax liabilities. And it's the assessment of the additional tax liabilities that actually is the tax revenue that they're generating for their unit. But if we've agreed to a pricing and it's fair, then I cannot assess any additional tax liabilities unless we can measure the tax revenue that would have been lost if we had not had that particular agreement. That is the savings, but that would be difficult to measure. So that potential loss in assessment of additional tax liabilities is something that FIs will not find as something that is beneficial to them, because they have a revenue target and I need to assess additional tax liabilities to meet it. If I agree with you on the pricing, how do I assess additional tax liabilities? So how do I meet my target? So that becomes a disincentive for them to actually implement that particular provision. But if they did, it would have encouraged voluntary compliance and actually would have saved the government in terms of profits that could have been shifted out of the country. So those are some of the things that I think FIs need to think about and see how they can actually improve voluntary compliance. But if they can give a grace period, if they can implement APAs, and if there can be more clarity in the way they do things, then I believe that taxpayers will have more and more incentive to voluntarily comply on their own, and the regime will become more robust and friendly.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And like you said, Hopefully, the authorities are listening. I can't say authoritatively to you, Dr. Bamfo, some of the things that you are reeling out here are some of the things that the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria also reeled out are in the communique that has been given to government. Sometimes we begin to wonder what exactly is it because they don't understand or because the chartered accountants who are working there are not able to go over and above the political appointees, and then you begin to really wonder what is going on. Hopefully, they are listening. Hopefully, a lot of the things that we are saying in here are just slow hangers
Yeah.
that the institute, and I repeat, with all sense of responsibility and professional acumen, that the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, where we look at our old charter, has been on with us since 1960, and new chapter into educating our publics. I am going to ask you two further questions. I heard them. I will simply pretend as if I didn't hear them. One for emphasis, the second for reconfirmation. The first one will be, you've talked about TP regulations. You've talked about key changes. And I am looking at a situation where these regulations and key changes are somehow consistent with the OECD TP guidelines. One, to mitigate double taxation, to mitigate against risks to taxpayers. What will be the 2, 3, 4 key changes by way of repetition so that our publics, when we hear, our legislators also will hear, recognize that it's not possible for a 1 hour program for them to understand, but like we always say, we, the Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, the institutes, are just at their beck and call. I'd like you to please help me delineate these key changes that you believe we already have getting trained on to now bridge the regulations with OECD TP guidelines.
Thank you very much, Mr. Akin. This is extremely important, and I'm going to add an element to it. I'm going to talk about changes in terms of processes and the regulation itself.
Right.
We had a very clear opportunity to make sure that the revised regulation of 2018 was something that we could all be very proud of. And let me say clearly, it was a significant improvement, compared to the 2012, regulation. However, to make sure that you don't have situations
Yes, as usual, we might have been looking for a glitch in there. I'm very sure Dr. Bamfo will soon join us. And one of the key elements of what he has said here is that for the regulations, which has been a work in progress up to 2018, that more of the technical voices of the institute is required. More of we repeating and repeating so that the FRS will see us as value partners of choice for professionalism, and that those guidelines should be clear, unambiguous, and of course with the other incentives that we have to give so that taxpayers can comply. We always say in the institute that is perhaps as simple as the case in air. Let's continue to look at it. I like to. When we come back, from a break that we are going to go for now, ask Dr. Bamfo when he comes back what I thought I had and I like for him to kind of repeat. We'll go on a short break again, very brief short break. Please don't go away. We are going to be back with you shortly. Yes, you are welcome back. If you're still with us, I know Dr. Josh Bamfo is back. No challenge at your location in there. The other, very quickly because of time, is that you made a statement to say that development of the Nigerian TP regime, when you compared to some other geographies and jurisdictions in Africa, was top notch. This compared with Ghana and Kenya. I wanted to be sure that I had you right. And the reason why I am saying this, and for the purpose of our friends and partners outside Nigeria who hear so many negative things about our country, if this is an area that the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria has shown light, partner with FRC, that means there's something good about Nigeria. I wanted you to just reconfirm that to us.
I can thank you very much. And I think it's important that we applaud great things when we really witness them. As much as I believe that there are areas of improvement, I'm the first to recognize that Nigeria has done an awesome job when it comes to the development of the transfer pricing regime. When it comes to being very proactive, building a team, they've increased the size, they've trained them. I've had an opportunity to actually have sessions training them at some point. So clearly they've been very open-minded about it. My home country, Ghana, on the other hand, have been trying to play catch up. I mean, almost every time they've looked to Nigeria in terms of how they actually were able to proactively go into the transfer pricing regime and make the best out of it. So today they are learning from them. Kenya actually had their regulations before Nigeria, but I can tell you categorically that Nigeria is, miles ahead of them now. So this is one area we can be proud of ourselves, but there's still room for improvement. And I believe that the Institute can be a very important platform when it comes to sensitization, when it comes to us exchanging ideas, that is the practitioners, the professionals, and the administrators in such a way that we shape the regime so that we make it more robust for taxpayers and for everyone.
Fantastic. Nigeria Farada say, and at the forefront of that is the Institute, quietly, without a fuss, asking for the authorities of Nigeria to give it to us, and we are going to deliver for the better good of Nigeria. Just very briefly, we have your parting shot on this subject, Dr. Bamfo.
Thank you so much, Mr. King, for the opportunity for me to come and share my views on this very important topic. I believe that transfer pricing is very critical, both for the government and taxpayers. And the more education and sensitization that we can give to taxpayers so that they can voluntarily comply, the better. And there's a role for everybody. And I think the Institute is doing an awesome job in terms of creating this platform where they take topical issues, from an accounting perspective, from a taxation perspective, whatever perspective, where we deliberate on those issues, educate the public, and also be able to shape, regulations, laws that actually govern some of these areas. I'm really, really touched by what the Institute is doing. And I believe that this is a very creative initiative that you guys really have differentiated yourself from other professional bodies, and you need to continue to do so. Um, my sincere thanks goes to the president of ICAN, Mrs. Comfort Olu Eyitayo, MNI CFA FCA, for being a leader with a vision to be able to come up with this creative concept. And most important, and last but not the least, my thanks to you, Mr. Ken Fatunke FCA, for your style. You make this whole session, something that I look forward to coming again, because it was very interactive. You made it very easy, relaxing, and very interesting and enjoyable. Because transfer pricing can be a very technical subject, but you made it exciting because of the way you organize this discussion. And for all our participants, those who tuned in, thank you for your time. Hopefully, we'll get an opportunity to engage once again. Thank you once again.
Thank you
for all this.
very, very, very much. And to my editorial team, who was at the bottom of the iceberg, the thanks go onto you. Very quickly, I'd like to say that the 69th induction ceremony for the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria is going to hold between May 24th and 25th, 2022, and also to tell you that we're breaking some other ceiling. Come May 24, the ICAN BOI Innovative Hub, where we are going to be giving avenue for people to come share knowledge, rent offices, and do your business without interruptions will come. And so the next ICAN on Air episode will come Tuesday, May 24, 2022 at 6 p.m. West African time. And you can see us on all ICAN online media, Facebook, YouTube. Go there, like ICAN, so it can be prompted. The topic we are going to be looking at will be in financing industrialization in Nigeria, the opportunities and challenges, where we'll have as guest Wahid Olagunju, PhD, former acting managing director and chief executive officer and executive director, small and medium enterprises of the Bank of Industry. You don't want to miss it, and get somebody else to come in and share. May I drop this nugget? And I quote, you members of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, we have watched silently your discipline, your rigor, and with your institute at the helm of affairs, I have no doubt in my mind that Nigeria is going to go places. End of quote. That is President Muhammadu Buhari speaking to our ICAN president and members of council when they paid him a courtesy call. And so the sun sets here on ICAN on Air to arise again on Tuesday, May 24, 2022. You be the change you always like to see. Until then, I remain Aki Fatunke, your anchor, ICAN on Air. Bye for now.